It's the summer of 1965, and a man is driving through the Missouri night with his fourth wife beside him. His name is Ira Louvin. He's 41 years old, and he's been playing mandolin since before he could spell his own last name, which, for the record, he changed because Loudermilk doesn't exactly fit on a marquee. He doesn't know yet that, within the hour, a drunk driver is going to cross his center line on Highway 70 and end both their lives in a head-on collision. He doesn't know that his third wife, a woman named Faye, once shot him 4 times in the chest and twice in the hand after he tried to strangle her with a telephone cord, and that he survived all 6 bullets only to die on a Missouri highway because a construction crew didn't bother with a barrier. He doesn't know that the brother who fired him, his own blood, his harmony partner for 23 years, will outlive him by nearly half a century, carry the guilt and the glory in equal measure, and eventually stand in the Country Music Hall of Fame accepting an award for both of them. And he doesn't know that the album he made 6 years ago, the one with a 12-foot plywood Satan and a pile of burning tires on the cover, will end up on every list of the greatest album covers ever made, for a record that almost nobody bought when it came out. Most of the damage, as it usually goes around here, was still ahead of him. Welcome to Country Mysteries. Ira Lonnie Loudermilk was born on April 21, 1924, in Section, Alabama, a town so small that even today its population hovers around 700, and that's being generous. His parents were dirt-poor cotton farmers, devout Baptists, and raising 7 children in a 3-room house without electricity or indoor plumbing. The Loudermilk family's primary source of entertainment, and frankly their primary source of therapy, was shape note singing at the local church. If you've never heard shape note singing, imagine a room full of people reading music the way you read street signs, by shape, not by name. It's raw, it's loud, and it sounds like something between a hymn and a battle cry. Ira's younger brother Charlie, born 3 years later, July 7, 1927, would become the other half of the most important close harmony duo in country music history. But in those early years, it was Ira who led. Ira who picked up the mandolin first. Ira who could sing in a tenor range so high and so tight that grown men in the congregation would stop mid-hymn just to listen. He had the most incredible voice I ever heard, Charlie later told an interviewer. He could hit notes that didn't exist for the rest of us. And even as a boy, he knew it. That kind of talent, born into that kind of poverty, in that part of Alabama, in the middle of the Depression, there was exactly one path forward, and it ran straight through the church door to a radio station. And honestly, what strikes me about Ira's childhood isn't the poverty itself. Half of Alabama was broke in the 1930s. It's the absolute certainty he carried, even then, that he was better than his circumstances. That certainty would eventually make him famous. It would also make him impossible to live with. By the time Ira was 16, the Loudermilk brothers were already singing together on local radio programs in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The parents had let them go, 2 teenage boys, no money, no connections, singing gospel harmonies for tips. What the family didn't know was that Ira had already started drinking. Not experimenting. Drinking. The boy who sang about Satan's temptation every Sunday morning was already answering the door. The Loudermilk brothers changed their last name to Louvin sometime in the early 1940s because, as Charlie put it decades later, Loudermilk sounded like a dairy product, not a music act. Not much of a rebrand, all things considered. Louvin still sounds like a French pastry, but it stuck. They started their professional careers singing gospel on the radio circuit, bouncing between Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Memphis, picking up whatever airtime they could get. There were interruptions. Charlie was drafted into the Army Air Forces in 1945, then again for Korea. Each time, Ira waited, though waited might be too generous a word. During Charlie's first absence, Ira played mandolin with Charlie Monroe, brother of Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass. Bill Monroe's mandolin style would become the single biggest influence on Ira's playing for the rest of his life. His brother Charlie Monroe, No relation to Charlie Louvin, which, yes, gets confusing, called Ira one of the top mandolin players in Nashville. A compliment that meant something, considering who his brother was. When the Louvins reunited, they settled into a pattern that would define their career. Singing gospel during the day, working day jobs to pay rent, and performing in the evenings. In Memphis, they sorted mail at the post office. Two men who would end up in the Country Music Hall of Fame, licking stamps for a living. Nashville wasn't interested in a gospel duo, at least not yet. The problem was simple and brutal. Nobody wanted to sponsor a gospel act. You can't sell tobacco with gospel music, a sponsor told them point blank. And in the radio era, if you couldn't get a sponsor, you didn't get a show. So the Louvin Brothers did what every gospel act secretly dreads but quietly knows is coming. They went secular. They added love songs, heartbreak ballads, and honky-tonk numbers to the set list. Ira treated the transition like a personal betrayal. Charlie treated it like breakfast. That tension between Ira's self-righteous fury and Charlie's pragmatic shrug would fuel every fight for the next 20 years. Their first secular recording, the Get Acquainted Waltz, was cut with Chet Atkins on guitar. Chet Atkins, the man who would produce half of Nashville for the next 3 decades, was sitting in the room, playing rhythm guitar for 2 broke Alabama brothers who still smelled like the post office. It was a minor hit, barely a ripple, but it was enough to keep them in the game. In 1955, the Louvin Brothers became official members of the Grand Ole Opry. If you know anything about country music in the 1950s, you know that meant they had arrived. The Opry wasn't just a stage, it was the stage. The only one that mattered. And Ira and Charlie didn't just get invited, they became regulars. Their sound was unlike anything Nashville had heard at that scale. Close harmony, Ira's impossibly high tenor floating above Charlie's warm baritone, but with a tightness that bordered on telepathic. In his New York Times review of Charlie's memoir, Alex Abramovich described it this way. Every so often, in the middle of a song, some hidden signal flashed and the brothers switched places, with Ira swooping down from the heights and Charlie angling upward, and even the most careful listeners would lose track of which man was carrying the lead. This was more than close harmony singing. Each instance was an act of transubstantiation. Transubstantiation. A word normally reserved for Catholic theology, used to describe 2 Alabama Baptists singing about Jesus. Somehow, it fits. The hits came in steady succession through the late 50s and into the early 60s. When I Stopped Dreaming, Cash on the Barrelhead, I Don't Believe You've Met My Baby. Over 20 recordings hit the country charts. Capitol Records, not some regional label, but Capitol, where Frank Sinatra recorded, signed them and gave them a recording deal that, by rural Alabama standards, looked like a winning lottery ticket. And in 1959, Ira designed the cover for their album Satan is Real. Let me paint you a picture, because it deserves it. The 2 brothers stand in a rock quarry in front of a 12-foot-tall plywood cutout of the devil. Red, grinning, horns and all, while a pile of old tires soaked in kerosene burns behind them, sending black smoke into the Alabama sky. The fire was supposed to represent the flames of hell. The safety precautions were supposed to represent, well, nobody brought up safety precautions. This was 1959. In a quarry, in Alabama. The devil was plywood. The album tanked commercially. Almost nobody bought it. But the cover became immortal, ranked decades later as one of the most iconic album covers in the history of recorded music. I think there's a lesson in that, but I'm honestly not sure what it is. What I am sure about is this. While the Louvin brothers were filling the Opry and hitting the charts, Ira's drinking was getting worse. Not gradually worse. Catastrophically worse. And nobody in Nashville, apparently, thought that was worth mentioning out loud. Here's where I need to be careful, because Ira Louvin's personal life reads like a list of red flags arranged in chronological order. He was married 4 times. 4. In an era when divorce was still scandalous enough to cost you a career in country music, a genre that was, let's not forget, built on songs about forever love and Jesus, Ira Louvin burned through marriages the way he burned through mandolins. And he literally burned through mandolins. When he was drunk and couldn't get his instrument in tune on stage, he would smash it to pieces in front of the audience. Then, when he sobered up the next morning, he'd glue it back together. There's something almost poetic about that cycle. Destruction, repair, destruction, if you ignore the fact that he applied the same logic to his wives. His temper was volcanic. Not metaphorically. People who worked with him used that exact word. Volcanic. Charlie described his brother's rage as something that came from nowhere and consumed everything in its path. When Ira got mad, Charlie said in his memoir, Satan is Real, it wasn't like being mad. It was like being on fire. And then there was Faye, Ira's third wife. The details of what happened between them are still disputed in some tellings, but the police report isn't. Faye Louvin shot Ira 4 times in the chest and twice in the hand. She told police he had tried to strangle her with a telephone cord. The year was 1930, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. Somewhere in the early 1960s, while the Louvin Brothers were still performing on the Grand Ole Opry, while they were still on the charts, while Ira was still singing gospel songs about the wages of sin every Saturday night on WSM radio, he survived. 6 bullets, 4 of them in the chest, and Ira Louvin walked out of the hospital. Faye was not charged, or if she was, the case went nowhere. The Opry didn't suspend him. Capitol Records didn't drop him. Nashville didn't say a word. It's the 1960s version of Nobody Saw Anything. A woman puts 6 bullets into a Grand Ole Opry member, and the industry's response is a collective shrug. I've covered a lot of these stories by now, and I still can't fully explain how Nashville managed to look away from that one. But they did. The marriage to Faye ended. Ira married again, his 4th wife, Ann Young. This one would last for the rest of his life, which, as it turned out, wasn't very long. In 1963, Charlie Louvin did what everyone in Nashville had expected him to do for a decade. He quit. He walked away from the Louvin Brothers and started a solo career. No warning, no negotiation, no trial separation, just done. I couldn't take it anymore, Charlie said later. The drinking, the fighting, the women. Every night was a new disaster, and every morning was an apology that didn't mean anything. I loved my brother, but I couldn't be in a room with him. And here's the thing that makes this particular breakup different from every other country music sibling feud. Charlie didn't just leave. He left knowing that without him, Ira had nothing. The Louvin Brothers were a duo. Their entire sound, that impossible close harmony, the switching of parts mid-phrase that made critics reach for words like transubstantiation, required 2 voices. One voice singing alone was just a voice. 2 voices singing together was the Louvin Brothers. Take one away, and the math doesn't work. Ira went solo. He had, but the solo career was, by every available measure, a disaster. He didn't have the stage presence to carry a show alone. He didn't have the temperament to work with new musicians. And he didn't have the sobriety to show up reliably. Nashville, which had tolerated Ira's behavior when he was half of a chart-topping duo, had no patience for it when he was a solo act with no hits. When the Louvin Brothers split, one Nashville session musician recalled years later, everybody felt bad for Charlie. Nobody felt bad for Ira. That probably tells you everything you need to know. There's an argument to be made, and I think it's a fair one, that Charlie breaking up the act was the most honest thing anyone in Ira's life ever did. Everyone else, the Opry, the label, the wives, either looked the other way or shot him. Charlie just left. Sometimes the cruelest mercy is the honest one. What neither brother knew in 1963 was that Ira had exactly 2 years left. And the way those 2 years ended would haunt Charlie Louvin for the rest of his life, which, it turned out, would be another 48 years of guilt, silence, and gospel music. June 20th, 1965. A Sunday night. Ira Louvin and his fourth wife, Ann Young, are driving home from a performance in Kansas City. They're heading east on Highway 70 through central Missouri, flat, dark, and straight as a ruler for most of its height. Near the town of Williamsburg, Missouri, population barely 1,000, the highway narrows. There's a construction zone. The road has been reduced to a single lane, with traffic from both directions sharing the same strip of asphalt. The year is 1965. There are no concrete barriers. There are no reflective signs. There are cones, maybe. A flag, probably. The kind of safety infrastructure that makes you wonder if anyone in the Missouri Department of Transportation actually drove this road after dark. A car comes the other direction. The driver is drunk. Not impaired, not over the limit. Drunk. He crosses the line, or what used to be the line, before the construction crew painted it into irrelevance, and hits Ira and Ann's car head-on. Both Ira Louvin and Ann Young are killed. He's 41 years old. She's, and this is something most accounts don't mention, younger than him by a significant margin, and this is her first marriage. She married a man who had already survived 6 gunshot wounds from his previous wife, and she died on a Missouri highway because a construction zone didn't have a divider. The drunk driver survived. Because in these stories, that's how it works. The person who deserved to walk away doesn't, and the person who caused it does. If you've been watching this show long enough, you've noticed this pattern. It never gets easier to say out loud. The irony, and I don't use that word casually, is that Ira Louvin spent his entire career warning people about the devil. He sang about temptation, about sin, about the wages of a life lived wrong. He designed a 12-foot Satan and set it on fire in a rock quarry to make a point about eternal damnation. And he died because someone else's sins, someone else's bottle, crossed a center line. The man who wrote The Christian Life was killed by the very thing he spent his own life doing, drinking. Just not his own drinking this time. Charlie got the phone call that night. He never talked about it publicly in detail, not for decades. When he finally did, in his memoir Satan is Real, published in 2012, he described the guilt simply, "I left him. I walked away." And then he was gone. Charlie Louvin kept going. He had to. He was 37 years old when his brother died, and he had a solo career that was barely breathing, but he kept it alive through sheer stubbornness and the fact that the Grand Ole Opry, whatever its faults, doesn't kick you out for grieving. He performed for decades. Not as a superstar. That ship had sailed when the Louvin Brothers broke up, but as what Nashville calls an elder statesman, which is a polite way of saying someone who's been around long enough that people feel guilty not inviting them. Charlie never had a #1 solo hit. He never matched the commercial peak of the duo. But he kept singing, kept showing up at the Opry, and kept the Louvin Brothers catalog alive in a way that nobody else could have. In 2001, 36 years after Ira's death, the Louvin Brothers were inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Charlie accepted the award for both of them. He was 74 years old, standing on a stage in Nashville, holding a plaque with 2 names on it, and one of those names belonged to a man who had been dead longer than many people in the audience had been alive. Their influence, it turned out, had been enormous all along, just delayed. The Byrds recorded the Louvin penned The Christian Life for their landmark 1968 album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Emmylou Harris covered If I Could Only Win Your Love in 1975 and took it to number 4 on the country chart. Graham Parsons, who we covered in episode 16, considered the Louvin Brothers the single most important influence on his music. Rolling Stone eventually ranked them number 4 on their list of the 20 greatest duos of all time. Number 4. Behind Simon and Garfunkel, the Everly Brothers, and Lennon and McCartney. Ahead of everyone else who ever harmonized into a microphone. In 2003, a tribute album, Livin', Lovin', Losin', Songs of the Louvin Brothers, won the Grammy for Best Country Album. Charlie was listed as a contributor. Ira was credited as a songwriter. The man who smashed mandolins and survived 6 gunshot wounds and died on a Missouri highway was winning Grammys 38 years after his death. The industry's timing, as always, was impeccable. Charlie Louvin died on January 26, 2011, in Wartrace, Tennessee. Pancreatic cancer. He was 83 years old. His last public appearance was on Marty Stewart's television show, where he sang Back When We Were Young, a song that, depending on your tolerance for sentimentality, is either devastatingly beautiful or devastating, full stop. The episode aired 3 days after Charlie's death. He outlived his brother by nearly 46 years. And in every interview, in every memoir, in every late-night conversation, the same question came back. Was leaving Ira the right thing to do? Charlie never gave a clean answer. He never could. So here's what I keep coming back to with Ira Louvin. The man was shot 6 times by his own wife, and that wasn't even the thing that killed him. He survived the bullets, survived the drinking, survived the divorces, survived Nashville turning its back on him, and then he died the most random, senseless death possible, on a highway construction zone, because someone else was drunk. The man who sang about the devil couldn't outrun him, and the devil didn't even come from inside the house this time. If you're watching this and you have thoughts about Ira, about whether Charlie made the right call, about whether Nashville should have stepped in, about whether a 12-foot plywood Satan in a rock quarry counts as art, I'd love to hear them. Drop a comment. Hit the like button if this one got to you. Share this with someone who thinks they know country music history, because I promise you, most people have never heard of the Louvin Brothers, and every single one of them should have. Next time on Country Mysteries, a woman so dangerous to the establishment that they banned not 1, not 2, but a list of her songs from country radio, and she kept writing more. Loretta Lynn. The Pill, the Patriarchy, and the Price of Telling the Truth in Nashville. I'm Roman. See you next time.